You are watching iOS and Android development, and my name is Mario Janot. And in this tutorial, we will be seeing how to work with switches. And switches are very useful in different projects, and we're going to see how we can manage these switches in iOS and also in Android. So let's start with with iOS. So with Swift, so I'm going to create a new Xcode project, single view app. I'm going to call this 004, and let's say switches underscore iOS. Save this here in my folder. And let's go right to Android, start a new Android Studio project. It's going to be saved in the correct location, and 004 switches Android. Okay, let's go back to Xcode, and on our main storyboard, I'm going to add 3 switches. So let's search for them. So switch. So here's one, Command C, Command V, so that I can have 2 of them, and Command V, and there we go. I have 3 switches. Let's see here, Android. Okay, everything is right. Back to Xcode, and I have my 3 switches, and all 3 of them I want them to be set to off by default. So switch state off. Okay, and my goal is when I click on one, it becomes active, and if one of the others are active, they deactivate. Because right now, if I look at this on iPhone 7, I'm going to launch this simulator. They can all 3 of them be active. So my goal is to only have one switch active at a time. So let's see here. So as this is working, let's go back to Android Studio, change this to activity just for fun, and delete that. And on the XML, delete the hello world, change the app theme, device default, no action bar. So let's go back. So there we go. I have the iOS simulator, and right now, as I click, they can all become active. My goal is so that when one is active, the others that are not being selected will be deactivated. Okay, so I'm going to create my 3 connections. I'm going to need that. So let's split the interface. Well, before doing that, let's do a little bit of cleanup in our view controller here. So I'm using comments here, of course. I won't be needing this method, but the view did load I will need, so I'm going to keep that. And this area, well, this area is going to be where I'm going to create my connections, so my IB outlets, and then there we go. So let's now split that up. I'm going to click on Option on the main storyboard to have it appear here on the right, and let's hide that. Okay, so let's create our first IB outlet, and I'll call it switch_1, and let's just copy that. That's going to be a lot easier. Copy paste, change the names to switch2, switch3, and make the connections like this. It's a little bit faster. Okay, so my three connections are done, and what else I'm going to do is I'm going to create also an event, an action, an IB action for all three of them to manage them. So let's do a right click on the mouse, click and drag, change the connection to action, and I'll call it switch action, the type UI switch, and the event value change. That's perfect. Okay, so right now it's only this switch that has this action, so I'll just do a right click, drag, and bring it to my code here, and now all three switches are connected to this action, and that is perfect. I can go back to my normal standard editor and continue. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an array. I'm going to create an array of switches so that I can manage this correctly. Okay, so let's create an array. So var, I'll call it array underscore switches, and it's going to be of type array of UI switch, and exclamation point because it's an optional, meaning that I'm not going to declare assign a value directly at this moment. And the reason is this. So just so that we understand, the exclamation point says this is an optional, and if I click on option and click here, I can see the declaration says UI switch exclamation point, meaning that it's an optional. And not to be too technical, but what it just means right now is that it is assign the value of nil. Okay. Now someone might say, well, why don't you just add your switches inside of the array of switches right away? So let's do that and see why it's not going to work. So I'm going to say equal and put, let's say, switch 1. Here's what is happening. It's saying that not in so many words, but what it's saying is that you're trying to add to this array of switches a switch that has not been initialized yet. So what it means is that right now it's just being declared and it hasn't been initialized, and that will be initialized once the view has been loaded. So that's why I can't do this. So let's do a few Command Z's here. So for now I'm declaring my array, okay, and not assigning any value, and by putting it with an exclamation point I'm doing a force unwrap of an optional, but it just means that it is equal to nil at this moment. So once the view has been loaded, okay, I'm going to now be able to add to my array of switches my switches. And now I don't have any problems because these 3 switches have been initialized once this method is being executed. So now I have an array of 3 switches. So I'm going to create now a method that will manage the switches. Okay, so let's create our method func, and let's call it manage switches. And this method will have one parameter, okay, and I'll call it selected switch. Type, of course, UI switch. And why this parameter? Well, all 3 switches can activate this action. So I need to know, I need the sender to know which one of these switches have activated this action. So this will be sent here, and I'll know which one has been clicked. And I'm going to use a loop, a for loop, to loop through all of my switches. Okay, so for, and I'll declare a variable that I'll call it, let's say, a switch in my array of switches. This just means that a switch will be equal to each element in my array. So in this case, this for loop will do 3 iterations, so 3 cycles. So during the first iteration, a switch will be equal to switch 1, and after that, switch 2, and then switch 3. Okay, so that's what it means here. And I'm going to use a conditional statement saying if a switch, and we know that a switch will be equal to each one of these switches. So if a switch is not equal to my parameter selected switch, that will receive as an argument the sender. So let's just say that we will be clicking on the first switch. Okay, so what's going to happen? The first switch will become active, and it's going to send itself here, and now it's going to do this loop. Okay, and this a switch, which is for the first iteration, will be the first switch. And I'm saying if a switch in my array is equal to the one that has been clicked, or is not equal to the one that has been clicked, I want to deactivate if one of the other switches is activated. So how do we deactivate? Well, I'm going to say a switch dot set on. So there's a set on method for these switch objects, and I'm going to say the first argument to give to this parameter is going to be false. And do I want it to be animated? Yes, true. Okay, so all the switches will be deactivated, set to off, except the one that has been clicked. And that's it. So let's call this method that we've created right here. So manage switches. Now it's time to give an argument to our parameter. Selected switch, well, it's going to be sender. Command S. Let's now see if this works. So I'm launching the simulator, and there we go. So as we can see, there's never more than one switch activated. And what's nice is that I can have like as many switches that I need and just add them in my array, and we're good to go. Alright, so now that that is done, let's quit Xcode. Oh, I shouldn't have maybe done that, since I could have used it for example, compilation errors. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see if I can initialize here. I don't know what's going on. Cannot find symbol class activity. Okay, what is? Oh, I did something here. I deleted the package, I guess. Command Z. And let's do option return. Now the import is done, and let's relaunch this to see if it works. And there we go. So now let's do a little bit of cleanup, just like I did in iOS. And in this case, we're going to need the method on create, and I'm going to go back to my main activity, or the activity main XML, and add 3 switches. So switch, let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so I have my first switch, and I do not need to have the word switch, so let's delete that, and let's create a connection like this. Maybe have it, whoops, a little bit further down, so there we go. And then let's change the ID for switch underscore 1. So there's my first switch, and I will copy, so Command C, Command V, click and try to select it and drag it down. So this one's going to be switch 2. Okay, there we go. Let's delete that connection and just bring it like that. Okay, so now I have 2 switches. Command, whoops, not Command D, but Command C, Command V. And I have switch 3, so that's good. Bring it down like this and delete that connection. Whoops, it's not deleted. I guess it's not. Okay, click and drag, and there we go. So Command S to save. I have my 3 switches. Let's launch this activity just to show that it's going to pretty much do the same thing that we had in the beginning in iOS. Okay, so they can all 3 be activated, and the goal is, of course, to once we have one activated, the other 2 will be deactivated. Okay, so I have my 3 IDs, switch 1, 2, 3. I am good to go back to my main activity, and let's create some connections. So for my switches, these are switches, so switch, and I'll call the first one switch 1, and I'll just declare them all on the same line, switch 2 and switch 3, semicolon. Also, I'm going to need an array of all these 3 to be able to insert all these switches in that array. So it's going to be an array list. Okay, and the type is going to be the type switch. My array, I'm going to call it, well, I'll call it just like we did in iOS. Let's say, whoops, array switches equals new array list, and of course the type switch, and the parentheses at the end is just to of course create our object. Okay, so now I have an array of switches, and in this case it is empty right now. So it's pretty much like almost saying that it's equal to null, but it's not null, it's just that it's been created but it is empty for now. Now let's create our connections. So in the onCreate method, let's do switch 1. So switch 1 equal find view by ID, resources ID, and it's the same name, switch 1. And I'm going to copy paste this, just change switch 2, switch 3, and change 2 and 3. So all connections are done. And now I'm going to add these 3 inside of my array of switches. So to do this, array switches, add, and switch 1. Let's copy paste that, and in the same array I'm going to add also switch 2 and switch 3. Okay, so that is good, and now we need to create an event for all 3 switches, just like we did in iOS. So to do so, I'm going to create a method, and I'm going to call it switch action, just like we did in iOS. So public, doesn't return anything, void, and it's going to be switch action. Now we need to be able to pass which which switch has been clicked, and to do so we're going to use a view, and I'll call it sender, and option return to import that package. Okay, so well, let's change the name here to switch action. Now, before writing anything here, this switch action has to be executed by all three switches. So let's go back to our XML, select the first one, and make sure that we have more options appearing, and down somewhere there's going to be an on click. There we go, on click. So if I click here, I can choose switch action. It's going to be the same thing for the second one. So all three of them are going to be calling or executing the same method. Alright, back to our Java file, and we're going to use a loop. So for, and in this case I'm going to declare a variable called I, and I will be counting from, starting its count from 0 until there's I is lesser than my array of switches, the number of elements, the size, and I++, that's just telling it how it should be counting. So one at a time, continuously. A conditional statement, and we're going to say if. Okay, so if in our array of switches, and we're going to get each element at index I, is not equal to sender, the one that has been clicked, then what we can do is get that element in our array, so get I, and we'll execute the method set checked, and the argument will be false. And there we go. That's pretty much it. So let's launch that and see if everything is working properly. Alright, so if I do this, that, so as we can see, only one of them is always active and deactivates all the others. There we go. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, and with that, thank you very much and see you next time.